Well, greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We're very glad you could join us on this August day for a program, Virtual Voices of the Game. My name is Bruce Markison, working in the Education Department here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And very glad to have with us today Sean Gibson, who is the executive director of the Josh Gibson Foundation. This year, this summer, marking the 50th anniversary of Josh Gibson's induction into the Hall of Fame. It occurred on August 7th, 1972. That summer, Josh Gibson, Buck Leonard became the second and third players to be elected to the Hall of Fame based on their Negro Leagues accomplishments. With us to talk about that induction, to talk about the legacy of Josh Gibson, is Sean Gibson. Sean is the great grandson of the Hall of Fame legend. He's really dedicated his life to the preservation of Josh's legacy. He's also the executive director of the Gibson Foundation. It is a nonprofit organization located in Pittsburgh. It's been around since 1994, so now 28 years. Joining us for Virtual Voices of the Game is Sean Gibson. Sean, thanks for being with us. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
Well, we're very glad to have an opportunity to talk about your great-grandfather, who, despite being one of the greatest catchers of all time, one of the greatest hitters of all time, remains somewhat of an overlooked Hall of Famer in some ways. I know that's something that you would like to try to change through the foundation, through some of the efforts that your organization has. For his career, Josh Gibson hit 165 documented home runs in the Negro Leagues. And this is according to the latest statistical research. You can find it at baseballreference.com. Of course, there were many other non-league games that he played in. So the total number of home runs that he hit, considering all of those games, much higher than 165. But in terms of official home runs in official Negro Leagues games that we know about right now, that total 165. He spent his early career, really first 4 early seasons with the Pittsburgh Crawfords. This is a classic photo. Many of you have seen it. Josh in the catching, the crouching position with the famed Crawfords team. Sean, I'm curious, when did you first become aware of who exactly your great-grandfather was and how phenomenal a ball player he was as well? I think we may have lost Sean.
Yeah, no, I couldn't, for some reason, it went out again, so. Sorry.
Were you able to hear my question, Sean?
Yes, I did. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry, Bruce.
Sure. So, just curious about when you really first became aware of who exactly your great-grandfather was and what a phenomenal ball player he was. At what age was he kind of introduced to you by your family?
That's a great question. So at a very young age, between 7, 8, 10 years old, I've always heard stories of my great-grandfather just through family gatherings, family reunions, holidays, and things like that. And he was known in the family as Big Josh, because again, at that time, Josh Jr. was living. So whenever somebody talked about Big Josh, they were referring to Josh Gibson, the baseball player. I would say I was 12, 13 years old when I really got to understand how important he was in the game of baseball. And at that time, I was in the either 7th or 8th grade, and we were doing a school project. And it was we had to do a paper. It was a group of 4 kids, 4 students, doing a research paper on African Americans. And a buddy of mine found this Josh Gibson book, and he brought it over to the table. And at that time, you're 12, 13 years old. When you see a book of your relative, that's like a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was really the first time I really understood who Big Josh was, that everybody kept talking about around the house. And I remember taking the book out the library and taking it back home to my mother and sharing it with my grandfather, Josh Gibson Jr. And that's when I kind of wanted to learn more about my great-grandfather. And that's when I kind of get into history through my grandfather, Josh Gibson Jr. So I would say around the age of 12 or 13 when I really got to understand how important he was to the game of baseball.
I'm curious, Sean, do you still have that book?
No, I don't. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I should have kept it and just paid the library fees.
Yeah. Have you read other books about him as well?
Yeah, there's several books. My grandfather, Josh Gibson Jr., when he was alive, he worked with a couple authors. Of course, the one book, Only the Ball is White, about the Negro Leagues. The Power and the Darkness on Josh Gibson is also a book. So, I've read several books, but my thing is, it's not really reading the books. I got my own knowledge of Josh Gibson through the family, so I'm my own book.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about your grandfather. I told you earlier, I met him very briefly at a Sabre conference. It was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Must have been about 20 years ago. It struck me that, yeah, he was quite a bit smaller, thinner than your great-grandfather, the ball player. But tell us about Josh Gibson Jr. and how he was able to really kind of pass along this family knowledge about his father.
Well, you made a good point about his body size. I mean, when you saw him at that age, he was a little older, but he was a bigger guy when he was younger. But my grandfather used to always say, it was a blessing and a curse to be Josh Gibson's son, right? The blessing, of course, is, your father is Josh Gibson. The curse was he also played, as some people don't know, he also played baseball in the Negro Leagues, and he also played in Canada. The curse was he was not as good as his father.
Yeah.
He didn't try to be as good as or great as his father. I mean, his father was who he was, and my grandfather Jr. was who he was. And, he always said that it was the namesake. He felt as though if he was named Mark Gibson, it may not have been as much pressure, but by he was being Josh Gibson Jr., he always felt there was a lot of pressure on his back to be as great or as good as his father. And he wasn't. He had no problems with telling people that, And so that's first and foremost. He also played for the Grays in 49 and 50 the last year of the Homestead Grays. But, as far as the knowledge, my grandfather Jr., he was a bat boy for the Homestead Grays. So he traveled with those guys. So a lot of his stories came from him being on the road. Sam Bankhead, who also played for the Homestead Grays, was a good friend of my grandfather's, Josh Senior, Big Josh. And he kind of took little Josh under his wing. And so he saw the racism. He saw, going into certain restaurants and the gas stations. He was 15 years old in 1947 when Junior passed away. Yeah. So you really think, he was a teenager, 13, 14. So he gained a lot of knowledge just traveling with those guys over the summer as a bat boy. So, a lot of that history of him traveling, he instilled that in me.
So even though Josh Sr. did pass away so young, he was, I believe, 35 when he passed away from the effects of a stroke, it sounds to me like your grandfather did get to know him pretty well.
Oh yeah, his famous line was his father died a few months before his birthday because his father promised him a car. He died when he was 15 years old of January. My grandfather's birthday is actually today. Josh Gibson's birthday is actually today, August the 11th.
Really?
And he was getting him a car that summer for his 16th birthday. So that's one of the stories he used to always talk about, is that, his father died right before he was turning 16 to buy him a car.
Sean, have you ever had a chance to talk to other former Negro Leagues players who either played against your father, with him, or maybe just, saw him from afar, knew about him as a player, contemporaries of his?
Oh yeah, I mean, when Josh Jr. was alive, as you mentioned, the Sabre conferences, the Negro League conferences where they would all get together, new conferences, I was his driver. So I was able to attend a lot of these functions. And a lot of these guys, double duty Radcliffe, Malin Duckett from the Philadelphia Stars, Stanley Glenn, they were all sit in the hotel and just, have conversation about the good old days. And Double Duty was the first person that told me that I looked like Josh Gibson. I heard it from my family, but a lot of my family members feel like I favor my grandfather, Gibson, Big Josh. Yeah. But Double Duty was the first person that actually, as a former player, actually acknowledged that. So, but yeah, you hear a lot of great stories. I mean, the story they would talk about Big Josh, of course, his home run greatness, how great of a player he was, but also some of the things he was off the field was, how he was a jokester. He was a kind of a jokester, a happy-go-lucky type of guy, like to have fun. But those guys spoke very highly of Big Josh, and I enjoyed having those conversations, just listening to those conversations. Bruce, you always wish that sometimes you wish you had a record these things. I'm in my early 20s. You don't think about stuff like that. But at that time, 20 years ago, I wish I had a recorder to be able to record these guys talking about Big Josh.
Sure. So even though he was the superstar player, often he was the best player, often far and away the best player on his team. It sounds like he was still relatable. He was still one of the guys.
Oh yeah, I mean, even my grandfather, even Junior, said that. He was very humble, and not just humble. He would help out a lot of other players and stick up for a lot of other players, a lot of other players. But Josh, if you see his photos, like you said, he has that beautiful smile. He's a big guy, about 6'2", 6'1", 215, but he was solid muscle, and if you see his forearms, they were huge. But yeah, he was definitely one of those type of players that he wanted to help his teammates out and do what he can to help everyone. He didn't take that star, some guys who are a superstar, worry about themselves. He was not that type of person.
We know what a great offensive player he was. We're going to run down some of his numbers from Negro Leagues play a bit later on. But I think sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle that he was a very skilled defensive catcher. And here, this is maybe the most famous photo of him. And it does show him with the catcher's mitt in the catching position. I mean, he seemed to take a lot of pride in his defensive play too.
Well, you mentioned, we all know the catcher position on the baseball diamond is the hardest position of all. You're in that crouch the whole time. You're getting beat up. So he took it very seriously. As you said, people always talk about his offensive skills and his home run greatness, but he's a great defensive catcher as well. You hear stories about him throwing people out from his crouch position. The thing about Josh and the other Negro League athletes, they played the game because they loved the game and they enjoyed the game, and that's how they went out and played it. But when it comes to Josh Gibson's greatness on the defensive side, he was one of the best. And so funny you mentioned that. I was just with Manny Sanguian a couple weeks ago, and I saw him. He always says, I never saw Josh play, but he's the greatest. And I'll be joking with Manny. And I said, well, Manny, I heard you were the greatest. He said, no, I can't hit like Josh. He said, I could catch, but I couldn't hit like Josh. So it's great to hear some of those stories from some of the former baseball players as well, like the great Manny Sanguian.
Yeah. Well, Manny was a very good player. He was an excellent catcher. He was very mobile. He hit for a high average. He was one of the great bad ball hitters. He certainly didn't have, near the power of a Josh Gibson, but he was a nice part of that very fine Pittsburgh catching tradition. I want to talk a little bit, Sean, about the Crawfords and what they mean to Pittsburgh. You look at some of the rosters they had, they were chock-a-block full of Hall of Fame players. One year they had 6 future Hall of Famers. They won a number of Negro National League championships. Many people feel they've been given a shot to play on the field with an American League or National League team. They might have won a World Series if they'd had that opportunity. What about today? The Crawfords, are they still remembered? Are there enough fans around that have the knowledge of the Negro Leagues that they can bring some attention to just how legendary those teams were?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the Crawfords, as you mentioned, the 35-36 Crawford team, on that team had 5 Hall of Famers, which was Oscar Charleston, Cool Papa Bell, Satchel Paige, Buck Leonard. I mean, not Buck Leonard, but Buck Leonard and Josh. So you're talking about 5 Hall of Famers on one team. But as you mentioned, the 2 teams, we were blessed to have 2 great teams here in Pittsburgh, the Grays and the Crawfords. And 2 phenomenal teams that Josh played with. Josh didn't have to leave the city of Pittsburgh. He came from a small town in Buena Vista, Georgia, and never had to go back because he played for 2 great teams right here in his city. It's unfortunately that he couldn't play for 3 teams in our city, which is the Pittsburgh Pirates. Yeah. But we all know that story. But when you talk about the Crawfords, as you mentioned, you got to start with the owner, Gus Greenlee. Some people may not know he was a numbers man. He owned the Crawford Grill, one of the famous, most jazz grills in the city of Pittsburgh. And so it started with Gus, and he was a numbers man. That's how he made his money. But Gus also built his own stadium back then. He was the first African-American to build his own stadium in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. And so, we carry on the tradition of both the Grays and the Crawfords. We have a tournament coming up next week, the Josh Gibson Negro League Classic. And both of our teams are wearing the Crawford uniforms and the Grays uniforms. And we use that as a tool to educate our youth about not just Josh Gibson, but all the other great Negro League baseball players who played in the Negro League. So, we talking about the Crawfords, you got to talk about what Gus Greenlee and what he's done, as well as the great teams in the 30s. But then you can't forget about the Homestead Grays either.
As it turned out, Josh spent only a few years with the Crawfords. The majority of his career with these Grays that you mentioned, he was actually with them for 9 years. I'm wondering if you could educate us a little bit about Homestead. My understanding is it's a borough in Allegheny County. What was it like as a baseball community? Where did they draw fans from? Tell us a little bit more about this community of Homestead.
Well, we start with Homestead. It was a steel mill. That's the most what they're known for, the steel mill community. They had a great owner, Cumberland Posey. But it's like you said right now, it's a small borough. It's about 20, 25 minutes outside the city of Pittsburgh. But a lot of tradition there, especially today. When you come across, it was called the Munhall Bridge. Now it's called the Homestead Grays Bridge. As you're coming across the bridge into Homestead, you'll see banners of the Negro League players as you're going into Homestead. You're going into Homestead, you see all the Homestead Grays going in. As you're leaving Homestead, you see all the Pittsburgh Crawfords going to the city of Pittsburgh. And as you're also going across this bridge, we just had a big mural. A famous artist here in Pittsburgh named Jeremy Raymer, who did a huge mural of Josh. So you'll see that actually going across the bridge as well on the wall of Voodoo Brewery. So it's a small community. Very small, but again, when you talk about the history, the Grays came from that type of atmosphere. As you see, the steel mill was the biggest industry in those times back then, right? And so there's a lot of teams, industrial teams. The steel mills had industrial teams back then as well. And so Cumberland Posey took that thought and came up with the Homestead Grays. And so, small community. So Westfield is where they played at. And there's a story about Josh Gibson hitting the ball out of Westfield where it hit the Borough Building. And so if you've ever been to Westfield, that Borough Building it's a nice shot. And so there's a lot of great history of Josh and Homestead in that little small borough.
That ballpark still exists?
Still exists. And actually, they just redone it. It's a turf field. And they kept the name Westfield, though, because of the history. But the high school uses it in that area, as well as one of the local colleges uses it as well. So it still exists. Now, before they renovated it, it still had the old style bleachers and everything like that. But of course, it's renovated. But the good thing is they didn't change the name. They kept it Westfield, which is the history part of it. Right.
Do you recall roughly how big the capacity was at Westfield when the Grays played there?
Yeah, I think it was like 3,000 or 4,000. Yeah, 3,000 or 4,000, the capacity.
Yeah.
Not that many.
And that was a good fit for a smaller community like Homestead, right?
Oh, for sure. For sure. But you got to realize too, Homestead's not far from Pittsburgh. So you got the Crawfords that's played over in the Hill District in the city of Pittsburgh, where Gus Greenlee built his stadium. And so you got two great teams. So I'm pretty sure, they come to see Josh. You had guys from the city and from Pittsburgh taking that 25, 30-minute drive over to Homestead.
Yeah. I'm curious, Sean, you might not know the answer, but I'm wondering if anybody in your family ever told you, did Josh Sr., did he like playing with the Crawfords better or playing for the Grays better?
Never had that question even asked to me, and I never even asked that question to my family. If I would take a guess, I would say the Grays. I mean, he's done more damage with the Grays. They, as we all know, the Grays won like 9 pennants in a row, 2 World Series. But again, with the Crawfords, and then his teammate, Buck Leonard, we're talking about Josh going into the Hall of Fame. Buck was in the Hall of Fame as well this year, and they were called the Thunder Twins. And so, yeah, put it like this. If he was to pick one, he'd probably pick them both because he didn't have to go far. You know what I mean? Like he had to go to Kansas City or Detroit, Chicago. He was still in his hometown city of Pittsburgh and played for two great teams. But I want to talk about this picture real quick. So this is a very famous picture. And I'm glad you got this picture because it shows when I look at this picture, it shows like powerful, right? You see all the bats laying next to him. You see he got two bats in his hand. But look at his arms. You know what I mean? Like my grandfather, he said this slogan, whenever he had pictures of Big Josh, it would say, "No steroids, just milk." And so, I mean, and people wonder how powerful he is. I mean, just look at his physique, his body, all those bats. And the other great part about this photo is look at the crowd, right? You see everybody how they're dressed. Everybody's in a suit, shirt, tie. We don't go to baseball games like that no more. And, my grandfather used to tell me when he used to go to the games dressed like that, they would go to the games dressed like that and go right to the Crawford Grill, And so it was just a great way of, because they looked at it as more of entertainment than a baseball game. It was more of an outing for them. And so that's why you see them dressed like that.
Yeah, I love the hats in particular. If they ever come back in style, I'll be one of the first one to buy one of those hats from a haberdashery, as they used to call them. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the way that people did dress for the game, it was like they would dress to go out for a dinner today. It's a much different attitude. Another thing that really strikes me about the picture, and I'm glad you brought it up, Sean, is his shoes. They look really beat up. They don't look like they're in the best of condition. I don't know if this was typically what he wore, but it looks like he's kind of worn through those shoes. I'm not sure if he could get through the game with them.
Yeah, but just like he wore the bats out, he wore everything out. That's why his sleeves is rolled up. He wore the sleeves out. I mean, he's a big guy. He wore everything out. But no, I mean, you figure back in those days, and it's funny you mentioned the shoes because I have a small role in the League of Their Own, the Amazon Prime series that actually starts tomorrow, playing Josh, and they had shoes like that, and they were very uncomfortable, Bruce, very uncomfortable. So I can just even imagine what those guys had to go through. That's a wool uniform he has on. Like you said, look at the shoes compared to the day. Even those gloves, those mitts, his catcher's mitts, they didn't have that much padding in there back then. But, back then, that was the way they wore, and that's what they used in those days. And they overcame that and came out and played the game of baseball at a high level. And I always give credit I give a lot of credit to Negro League baseball players because we always compare Major League Baseball players to Negro League baseball players, right? Well, the one difference is that Major League Baseball players did not have to worry about death threats and worry about where they had to eat, worry about where they had to take a shower and things like that. So they were comfortable. They could wake up every morning, go to the ballpark and play the game. Negro League baseball players, before they went to sleep, they had things to worry about. When they woke up, they had things to worry about. So they already had pressure on their back before they even got to the ballpark, but they still came out and played the game at a very high level and did it very well.
Absolutely. Any of the materials from his playing days, either his uniform or his equipment, any of that get preserved, get passed down to you?
No. So, and if you'd have asked me how to get it, it's down in my game room. But I do have his 1941-42 MVP trophy from Puerto Rico.
Nice.
I have that right downstairs. Now, I do have older relatives in my family. So Josh was the oldest of three children. His sister, which was my Aunt Annie, she lived till she was 90 years old. And a lot of stuff, some bats, passports, from what I've been told. I've never seen these things, but that trophy came from that same collection that they gave to me a few years ago. And so there are some things laying around of Josh that we know of. I haven't seen them, but as far as uniforms, anything like that, no. And again, Bruce, you gotta realize these guys have been playing Major League Baseball at the time. They never thought that these things be worth anything, or people when they see their uniforms or cleats or bats. And so, no, we don't have anything. Only thing I have original is his 41-42 MVP trophy from Puerto Rico.
Tell us a little bit more about that trophy. What does it look like?
Beautiful. It's beautiful. It's about this tall. You know, it's nice. It's in Spanish.
Yeah.
But it does say it says Joshua Gibson. I can read that part, and it says MVP in Puerto Rican League, something like that on it. But we did get it appraised probably about 15, 12 years ago. It was appraised at that time of about $75,000. But we will never sell it. You know, we will never sell it. It's a piece that I'm gonna put in my will and have my kids never sell it either.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing that we have of Josh, so we would never sell it.
Well, it's not bad. An MVP.
I would never say. Let me say this: never say never. But
Yeah.
But it depends on the number.
Yeah. Well, still an MVP trophy. That's a nice thing to have. My understanding with a lot of the Negro Leagues players, they had to give their uniforms back to the team at the end of the season. So in a way, it makes sense that much of that did not get passed down.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, but I'm pretty sure if Josh wanted to keep his, or Satchel Paige or Cooper Bell, some of the star players wanted to keep their uniform, I'm pretty sure Gus Greenlee or Come Posey would have said no.
Yeah.
But you're right. Some of the players had to give them back. But like I said, I'm pretty sure if some of the star players wanted a uniform, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have told them no.
We're going to get back to the topic of Josh Gibson in a moment, but you did bring up that you've got a small part in this new series, A League of Their Own. It's been getting a lot of attention. You mentioned it's going to start tomorrow night, Friday night, August the 12th. You're going to be playing your great-grandfather. Do you know which episode or episodes that's going to be?
I do not, but there's two things. I'm playing him. There's two people playing Josh. So there's another person playing Josh that you will see his face, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing Josh as a catcher, so I have a catcher's mask on. And at bat is Monty Irvin. So the guy is playing Monty Irvin. I'm Josh. They do bring the camera to my face, but I have a catcher's mask. I had to explain it to people because there's another guy playing Josh as well. I couldn't do it because I was on a road trip, so I had to bring somebody in. Then I'm also in a couple other scenes as just as a union worker in a factory. So you may see me walking by somewhere, but the scene that I don't know what scene it is, but the episode will be me and Monty Irvin. That'll be me as a catcher.
That's great. I mean, this must have been a lot of fun for you to do.
I would say this. It wasn't too much fun because I've never been an extra in the movie. It's a long day, Bruce. It's a long day.
Yeah.
It's a long day, man. Then, like I said, wearing clothes like that, the shoes, they had the style of the 1940s. So all the shoes were small. They had those wingtip shoes. So something I'm not used to, but it's exciting now because it's done and over with. But I got called for another extra for another movie they were filming here, and I said no. I said no.
Yeah.
Anything to look at the Negro Leagues or Josh, I would do it. But anything other than that, no, it's not for me. It's long nights and long days.
Do you feel like you did a good job in playing those parts?
Oh yeah. I'll be honest with you. I was proud to play those parts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I was especially playing Josh. I was proud to be there. So that's what I said. Regardless of the long nights and my feet hurting, it wasn't about that. It was about me portraying the legacy and carrying on the legacy of Josh Gibson. So I was very proud of that.
We've talked about this photo, which is a great photo. This is probably my favorite photo of your great-grandfather. It's a little bit grainy, but it's a rare action shot. Looks like he's just hit a home run for the Grays. It looks like it's a home game based on just the style of the uniform. So I'm guessing this is West Field. You can see the catcher and the umpire are giving him a good look over as he comes toward a home plate. This is another great picture. What do you think about, what details do you really notice when you see this shot of Josh Gibson?
Well, one, that would not be West. I think that's four. So maybe four because of the bleachers. Westfield bleachers.
Oh, you're right. It's too big. Yeah.
It have double deckers. Yeah, that's too big. If it is a home game. But again, same thing. Nice crowd. You see the umpires there, how they're dressed, back in those days as well. Like you said, it looks like if you was to assume Josh hit a monstrous home run somewhere, hopefully somewhere in the night, and never got back. And he's taking his good old time coming across the plate. Like, the facial expression to me is like, you know what, this is another day at the ballpark. Like, he does this all the time. He's just so nice and calm and collective. Like, okay, who's up next? So that's when I first see this picture. It's more of his facial expression of how calm he looks. Like, it's just a routine thing for him.
There were players in the Negro Leagues who played with a lot of flair. Maybe they didn't celebrate as much as some of the players do today when they hit home runs. It seems to me that Josh was more of a business-like player. He didn't necessarily approach it with a lot of flash and daring, just kind of business-like, did the job.
So I'm glad you asked that question, to mention that statement. So my grandfather, so if you notice on Josh, that last picture you had, Josh he was known for rolling his sleeves up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my grandfather, Junior, used to always say that was his intimidation. He didn't do a lot of talking, but he would do certain things like warm up with 3 bats or 4 bats, have his sleeves rolled up. So he did a lot of things like that. As you can probably say, not showboating, but kind of a intimidation role, instead of him maybe, flipping his bat or, doing some kind of, dance or whatever he was doing back then across the plate. But he did that based off his appearance. And, and so that's what he used, his appearance. Yes.
Very significant development was December of 2020. That's when Major League Baseball announced that it would officially consolidate Negro League statistics into Major League statistics, thereby officially equating them with Major League caliber. Now, I think most real diehard baseball fans know that the Negro Leagues were on a par with the Major Leagues. But this certainly made it official. This made a statement to fans of all kinds. When you heard about this decision by Major League Baseball, what was your reaction?
Excited. I mean, myself as well as the other family members were very excited. But let me just say this, the excitement has died because nothing has happened. We've been waiting almost 2 years for them to actually include the statistics into the record books. And we spoke with John Thorne several times, the families, and John Thorne assured us that the stats will go in last year after the World Series. And so, Bruce, yes, it was great, the announcement, but I would say this. When that announcement first came out, my phone was ringing off the hook from reporters about, is Josh going to be the home run king now and all this? And I didn't understand too much about it. Then I got with Gary Ashwell and those guys from Seam Heads. They kind of explained everything to me. But a lot of reporters was asking me, do you think this is like a Black Lives Matter movement suggestion? Why did Major League Baseball make the decision 2 weeks before the end of the year with everything that was going on in the society with George Floyd killings? And I said, I don't think that's their motivation. But you can ask them that question. I can't speak for them. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Bruce. Now, like I said, it'd be 2 years. You said 2020, right? They made the announcement. Yeah. Nothing has happened since then. Nothing. Elias, you go to Elias, there are no records of Negro League Baseball players in their books. So to answer your question, we're still waiting.
So the statistics are at the Baseball Reference website. They're at the Seam Heads website as well, but apparently not in any other publications, not at the Elias Sports Bureau.
Well, Elias, we all know Elias are the official records of Major League Baseball, right?
Sure.
And until it's in there, it doesn't matter. We know Baseball Reference, Sean Freeman, those guys. I know those guys very well, and I know Gary Ashwell. We know those guys have it in their database, but Major League Baseball said they are now, which to me I thought was a terrible statement to make when they said they are now major leaguers. They were already major leaguers. You guys just didn't recognize them as major leaguers. We always thought this Josh Gibson was a major leaguer, but officially, they're not in Elias yet. So until they get into Elias record books, we were still waiting, Bruce.
Are you planning to make a follow-up call, some kind of contact with Major League Baseball, get an update on the situation?
Yeah, I did. I don't want to discuss that, but I spoke with John Thorne. He kind of gave me why the reason is, and I don't want to discuss that here, but I told John Thorne that should have been taken care of before y'all made the announcement.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't make an announcement, then do business later. Should have handled the business first when the announcement came up. It was backwards. So now we're waiting for these stats, and I have to answer questions from people like you about the statistics when there's no statistics.
Well, let's talk about some of these numbers, Sean. He played 598 official league games. Now that could change because more research is being done, more box scores seem to be uncovered. But 598 official league games, 165 home runs in those games. Now you figure 598 official league games, that rounds out to more than 3 full seasons. 165 home runs, that's over 50 home runs in those seasons. So that's pretty amazing, even though the total might not jump out at you 165. But the fact that they're coming in fewer than 600 games, that's impressive. But what's really impressive, Sean, about his statistics, lifetime batting average in Negro Leagues competition, 374. On base percentage, unheard of, 458. Slugging, even more unheard of, 720. I mean, these are like statistics, almost like of a superhuman. Incredible numbers.
Yeah, and you're right, and hopefully we can see those in Elias's record books. But yeah, even in his batting average, he been at 441 one season. So, I mean, like you said, it's superhuman. It's funny you mentioned that word because if you look at an old tape of Satchel Paige speaking at the Hall of Fame, a reporter asked Satchel Paige, "Did Josh Gibson really hit a ball at a Yankee Stadium?" Satchel, in quote, said, "Sure. Josh is one of those superhuman. There would never be another Josh Gibson like him in 1,000 years." And we use that quote a lot with our students, just to explain to them how great Josh Gibson was. And that came from Satchel Paige, one of the other greatest Negro League baseball, I don't even say Negro, one of the other greatest baseball players of all time. And so you are talking about superhuman numbers, but that's the way Josh was. And so you look at, people always compare Josh to Babe Ruth or the Negro League baseball players to Major League Baseball players. These guys would have loved to play in the majors, but we all know what happened. Kennesaw Montland denied those guys. But as you show this picture here of Josh and Satch, two of the greatest two of the greatest baseball players of all time. One pitcher and one hitter. And they were good friends. And so, like I said, for Satch to make that statement that Josh is superhuman, and he played against Josh and played with Josh, well, you already said it again, Bruce, superhuman number. That's right.
Yeah. They faced each other many times. Paige has told some remarkable stories about some of his face-to-face encounters with Josh Gibson. But as you point out, they were friends. They did get along, and we can see a pretty big smile from Josh here and a little bit of a smirk from Satchel as well. So an indication, yeah, they were friendly.
So this picture, we're friends with the Paige family, and we always say, you look at this picture and say, what are they talking about, right? And the Paige family's like, well, Satch is probably talking about how he's going to strike Josh out with this ball. And I said, yeah, and Josh is probably talking about how he's going to crack that ball with this bat. So it's always a good conversation to have with the other family members. But you're right. We have a photo of Satch holding a picture of Josh, a huge picture of Josh. And that just shows the love and respect of each individual and the love and respect off and off the diamond. They were great friends. They knew they were the stars in the Negro League. And they knew they had to, just like in the NBA, if it's Michael Jordan and Larry Bird or Magic and Larry Bird, they know they were the stars and they're the leaders. And these guys were the leaders of the Negro League.
One of the things that kind of stuns me about the picture. Josh, you mentioned, was about 6'2", but Satchel kind of towers over him here. He looks like he's about 6'5".
Yeah.
I guess I don't think of him being that tall, but that may have very well have been his height. I'm curious, Sean, did your grandfather, Josh Jr., did he know Satchel? Did he have a chance to talk to him?
Yeah, he met Satch several times. I want to say he went to Satch's funeral. I know
Really?
I know when I was around, I went to Bud Leonard's funeral when he passed
Yeah.
away, me and my grandfather. But yeah, he spoke with because Satch was in Kansas City. And so, yeah, he talked to Satch, told me some great stories of him and Satch talking once Satch retired. But, even he said, man, I loved your father. He's always, I loved your father. He was the best, and we loved playing against each other. My grandfather, Junior, always talked about how they loved playing overseas. He always talked about the overseas, when they played overseas, how great it was to play overseas, and they had to deal with the racism and things like that. So they really enjoyed playing overseas.
Speaking of Buck Leonard, here's a great photo of him 50 years ago. This was the induction for Josh, who, of course, had passed away in 1947. So it was August 7th, 1972. Sean, this is literally outside of my office. Our education offices are right in the corner of what is now called the Hall of Fame Library. As you can see on the windows there, at the time it was called the National Baseball Library. And that's where the inductions took place from 1966 until 1991. So here we see Buck Leonard. Buck lived, I believe, into the mid-1990s. So he was at the ceremony. There he is, being presented with his plaque by the commissioner, Bowie Kuhn. Buck inducted that year. He and Josh were teammates with Homestead for a long time, 1937 to 1946. What was their relationship like, Josh and Buck?
Phenomenal. And the reason why I say this is because I never had a chance to meet Buck Leonard. But again, the one good thing about being a descendant of a Negro League baseball player, you're friends with the rest of the family members. And so just talking to Buck Leonard's family, they said, when Buck spoke of Josh, his face lit up. I mean, all he did was praise Josh, how good he was, how great of a friend he was. He talked about his home runs. He talked about the teams they had. But he also talked about other great players as well. But the families, just hearing the family stories from the Buck Leonard family, telling me how Buck talked about Josh was enough for me to understand how important Josh was to Buck Leonard, and I'm pretty sure that vice versa, how important Buck was to Josh Gibson.
Can you imagine being a pitcher having to face that lineup? I don't know if they batted back to back or how often that was the construction, but Gibson and then Leonard and then Gibson, having to deal with a great right-hand hitter, a phenomenal left-hand hitter. I mean, what an impossible task that must have been.
Yeah, that's why they won 9 pennants in a row. They couldn't stop them. But it's a team sport, and the guys before them and after them had to come through as well. So, but again, like you said, just to have that lineup, that's what they're called, the Thunder Twins. They were bringing thunder, and back to back, like you said, a lefty and a righty. If you walk Josh, you got Buck. If you walk Buck, you got Josh. So you're gonna get one or the other. So that was a phenomenal lineup, as you mentioned.
Here's another great photo from that 1972 induction here in Cooperstown. So from left to right, we've got Yogi Berra with a plaid jacket, Lefty Gomez, a terrific pitcher for the Yankees, very young Sandy Koufax. He was actually the youngest man elected to the Hall of Fame when he got in 72. The aforementioned Buck Leonard, and then all the way on the far right, 300-game winner Early Wynn. So they were the 5 living Hall of Famers. And then your great-grandfather, Josh, was represented by this man, your grandfather, Josh Gibson Jr. Great photo, clear photo of Josh Jr. with Bowie Kuhn. You look at this photo, what do you think about?
We're celebrating his birthday today, August the 11th. I mean, I'm proud. I mean, my grandfather representing his father. I mean, of course, we all wish that Josh was there, but he was carrying on the legacy at the time of his father, and he represented his father well. And that's why I was saying, I wish we could find his Hall of Fame speech, even better. Yeah. But, when I look at this photo, man, I just look at, of a strong Black man representing his family and accepting the award on his father's behalf. And I'm pretty sure his speech was just phenomenal as this photo.
Did Josh Jr. talk a lot about this day with you?
Not really. We talked a little bit about, he just talked about, as far as the family going up. There's another photo that you didn't have is his wife went, Josh's sister, Big Josh's sister was there, Annie, and my aunt and my uncle. My mother's the oldest out of the 3 kids, so she was not there. But my aunt and uncle was there. And I think he was more excited for the family to be there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it was an experience for them. Because he went to the Hall of Fame, as a family member, you go to the Hall of Fame. He went to the Hall of Fame a few times after that to see other players get in. And that's one thing I wish the Hall would have passed that on to me for me to go up. They don't pass it along. But no, I mean, he was, of course, very excited, very happy to be able to represent his father and the Gibson family.
It's one of the things that I try not to take for granted when I come into work every day. I often come in through the library doors from Cooper Park right into the lobby of the library. And it often does come into my mind that, yeah, this is where the induction was, starting in '66, when Ted Williams and Casey Stengel had their day in the sun. Ted Williams that day famously talked about the importance of getting Negro Leagues players in the Hall of Fame. Satchel Paige, and of course, Josh Gibson, Buck Leonard. He specifically mentioned Paige during his 1966 speech. And we think about this site here in Cooper Park in front of the library. While we've kind of outgrown the space because our crowds today are so much larger than what Cooper Park could fit, it's still a very scenic area, very beautiful area. I'm curious, have you been up here at all? Have you seen Cooper Park, the front steps of the library?
Yeah, before I get into that, I want to mention the Ted Williams story real quick, because
Sure.
My grandfather, Josh Gibson Jr., and so as you mentioned Ted Williams' speech, he referenced also Josh Gibson. So in his speech, it's only a 3-minute speech, not that long, and he mentions that one day he hopes the likes of Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige will be inducted into the Hall of Fame. That was in 1966. 5 years later, Satch goes in 71. Junior in that picture always credited Ted Williams for opening the door for Negro League baseball players. Junior always felt if Ted Williams does not mention Gibson and Paige in his speech, he does not know how long it will take for Major League Baseball, or maybe I should say Cooperstown, to elect Negro League baseball players to the Hall of Fame. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because my grandfather, Junior, always gave Ted Williams credit for that. Yes, I've been to Cooper. The last time I was there, of course, when they inducted all the Negro League players in 2006, I was there. I did an educational program a few years ago. Me and Brent Stevens, who was Babe Ruth's grandson, we had an educational program called Josh and Babe, which teaches about diversity. So we was there then, but that was the last time I was there. I haven't been there since. I was trying to get up there this year to see, of course, the other Negro League baseball players go in, but unfortunately my schedule not permitting me to get there.
Well, hopefully we can get you back up here soon. We can take a walk through Cooper Park right outside my office. I want to talk for the remainder of the program mostly about your efforts with the Josh Gibson Foundation. A lot of different initiatives going on. This is something that's already happened. I guess the dedication of Josh Gibson Field. Tell us about this ballpark, where it's located.
Yeah, this field was actually done in 2008 with the help of Major League Baseball, the Pittsburgh Pirates, City of Pittsburgh. This is actually Ammon Field, where the Pittsburgh Crawford Sandlot team played. That's where Josh actually started playing Sandlot ball. And this is located in the City of Pittsburgh Hill District area. And so we renamed the field Josh Gibson Field, and a lot of history there. Like I said, the League of Their Own, they didn't film there. They did take a visit to see about filming there. If you go to the field, the dugouts are all painted with the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords by our students of the Josh Gibson Foundation. So it's an educational tool. Right in front of the field, up the steps, there's a historical marker that talks about Josh Gibson as well. Then right next to the community center where we do our programming at is the church where Josh Gibson had his funeral at. So it's a lot of history, that little small area, the baseball field, then the historical marker, as well as the church, all about Josh Gibson. So yeah, we're very proud to have his name And we get a lot of people that call me to contact me and want to do photos and take photos up there. So it's a great tourism site for people to come in to see the field.
And the kids still play there to this day.
Yeah, that's where our tournament next week will be there.
Oh, terrific. Yeah. Now, is that a replica of the Hall of Fame plaque you're holding there?
That's it. That's the replica that we have in our family of the Hall of Fame plaque. And I always tell people, if you've never been to Cooperstown, this is what you'll see, a little bigger.
Yeah, yeah. And you got the Grays home uniform, the pinstripes too.
Great uniform. Yeah, this was a photo shoot for one of the local newspapers here in Pittsburgh. So it worked out great.
So that's an initiative that's already been accomplished, and it's active. Kids are still using it. This is something that I know you're working on right now, the Gibson MVP campaign. For those who have not heard about this, explain exactly what this effort is.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Kennesaw Mountain Landis was the commissioner at the time who denied over 3,400 African-American men an opportunity to play in Major League Baseball. Kennesaw Mountain Landis' name was on the MVP award. It was called the Kennesaw Mountain Landis Memorial MVP Award. Well, back in 2020, by the efforts of Mike Smith, Barry Larkin, and Terry Piddleton, they asked that his name be removed off of the MVP award, which was. The three names are considered renamed the MVP award after was Branch Rickey, Frank Robinson, who's the only player to win the MVP in the American League and National League, and Josh Gibson. When we read this article, we had no clue that Josh Gibson was involved in this, naming rights. So what we did from our foundation standpoint, we started an MVP campaign. And like you said, it's our hashtag is JG20MVP. We have a website, which is jg20mvp.com. And that face you see there is actually T-shirts that we sell. If you follow us on social media, you'll see a lot of people wearing different T-shirts. Even these T-shirts here are Hall of Fame T-shirts, where we use this campaign to get the BBWA to notice that Josh Gibson should be the MVP, should be named after Josh Gibson. But what I want to say is that it's not about, if the MVP was named after Josh, it's not just about Josh Gibson. Josh will represent those 3,400 men that were denied the opportunity to play in the majors. And also, our campaign is more of a poetic redemption type of campaign. How ironic would it be for the person who denied Josh Gibson, these great players, an opportunity to play Major League Baseball, be replaced by one of those same players who he denied? And so go to our website, jg20mvp.com. Read more about it. If you like our efforts, there's a petition. You can sign the petition as well. But yeah, jg20mvp.com is the site that you can also purchase the T-shirt or read more about the MVP campaign.
So Sean, this is a decision that'll be made by the baseball writers?
Yeah, so we have an advocate that's working on Josh. And last year we thought it was going to make an announcement, but of course we know the winter meetings did not happen because of the baseball lockout. And so we're hoping that this December, from what I was told, it'll be up for discussion. During a discussion, it can move forward for a vote. So we will know, hopefully we'll know something in this December during the baseball winter meetings.
Very good. Now let's talk about your organization in a broader sense. This is a snapshot or a screenshot of your homepage for the foundation, joshgibson.org. The foundation has been around since 1994. Tell us, if you will, Sean, about some of the broader goals of the Josh Gibson Foundation. What are some of the things you'd like to accomplish over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, the main goal is getting more kids off the street and getting them into either career force readiness programs or colleges. We serve over 300 kids, inner city kids, through the Josh Gibson Foundation. We have 3 locations here in the city of Pittsburgh. We're also a partner of the City of Pittsburgh Parks and Recs Department, as well as City of Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so we have our STEAM program for 8th grade boys. We have our mentoring program for boys 4 through 8. We have our BOSA program. BOSA stands for Business and Sports Academy. It teaches kids the business side of sports. It's a high school curriculum that teaches kids about sports media, sports marketing, sports law, sports sales, and sports events. And so, as you mentioned, the goal is in the next 5 years, we just made an announcement at our luncheon I don't know if you're familiar with a miracle field. Are you familiar with the miracle fields?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So all the miracle fields here in the city of Pittsburgh are in the suburbs. There are no miracle fields in the inner city. And so our goal is to have a miracle field in inner city or close to inner city where gifted African Americans or inner city kids can also be a part of this miracle field.
Yeah.
And so it's a $9 million project. We just announced it on Friday. We just acquired the Old Boys and Girls Club here in the district. And so we're hoping to turn the Old Boys and Girls Club into a community center with the miracle field. It'll be a true community center that will service youth, adults, seniors, and the gifted, as well as a miracle field. So our goal is to keep the gifted all year round. Most miracle fields now just keep the kids on the spring and the summer, at least on the East Coast. But our goal is to keep them all year round. So that's our 2 to 3 year project down the road. We want to get involved with the miracle fields.
Is another goal to try to get more people aware of what your great grandfather did? Because the further and further we get away from Negro Leagues, the timetable, its heyday was really in the 20s, 30s, 40s. It still existed in lesser forms in the 50s and early 60s. But the further we get away from that, the higher the risk we lose the memory of some of these great players who didn't get a chance to play in the American League or the National League. Is part of what you want to do sustaining, advancing the memory of Josh himself?
Well, yeah, of course, Josh, but not just Josh. So one of the goals that we have a Negro Leagues Family Alliance, and that alliance is several family members. One of our goals right now is to have a Negro League Day, right? There's all these days, there's Clemente, there's Jackie Robinson Day. We feel as though that the Negro Leagues are so important. Like you said, we don't want to lose that history, right, Bruce? So why not have a Negro League Day throughout the Major League Baseball? May 2nd of 1920 was the first Negro League game, right? Ruth Foster from the Negro Leagues, February 13th, 1920. We would like to have a National Negro League Day that every day on May 2nd, every year on May 2nd, that every Major League Baseball team celebrate the Negro Leagues. So that's one way to keep it, not just Josh's legacy alive, but all the other great Negro League Baseball players alive. So that's our initiative right now, to have a Negro League Day. We would like that to be May 2nd.
Well, it's a great idea. I wish you the best of luck with those and these other worthy initiatives that you have mentioned. Again, the 2 websites for the foundation itself, people want to visit that. We encourage them to do so, joshgibson.org, joshgibson.org. And then specifically in terms of the Josh Gibson MVP initiative, that site is jg20mvp.com. Again, jg20mvp.com. Sean, it's been very informative, been a real pleasure for me to talk to you this past hour. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Any questions or?
Well, lost your audio for just a moment there, Sean, but again, our thanks to you for coming with us. It's a great effort. It's a noble effort with your organization, the Josh Gibson Foundation. Again, our guest, Executive Director of the Foundation, Sean Gibson, joining us on Virtual Voices of the Game. We thank all of you for being with us as well. Hope you enjoyed the program as we broadcast from a sunny day. Yes, Sean, you had something else to say.
Is there any Q&A or not? Is there any questions in the audience?
We had a question from the audience, but it was one you already answered. Okay. One of our viewers wanted to know about objects that you have from Josh, which we actually did talk about a little bit earlier. So we were able to address that question. Yeah. Well, all right, Sean, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.